Welcome to the Manna at the Tap podcast. My name's Gloria, and I host this podcast, which offers us daily manna to feed the spiritual soul. We are on the journey through the season after Pentecost. This is the second Sunday, June the 2nd, 2024. The lectionary text we're following today is 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 10. It's the story of God's people who have passed through the wilderness and are now settled in the land God promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joshua, who was with them from their beginnings in Egypt, has already passed on, and now there is no defining leader, only a series of judges who come to power during difficult times. The tribal wars threatened to tear the people apart. And at the end of last week, when we opened 1 Samuel chapter 1, we met a woman named Hannah who was desperate to become pregnant and have a son. Her husband married another woman named Peninnah, who bore him children. And even though Peninnah's name meant precious stone, she was like a millstone around Hannah's neck. She taunted her day and night because she was barren. Hannah's husband was just as insensitive to her needs, wondering if he was not better to her than if she had 10 sons. Hannah was misunderstood and she was in pain and sorrow, unable to eat or drink when the family attended Shiloh, the place where the tribes of Israel gathered yearly to worship God. The loose system of judges in Israel was in disarray, and the nation was falling apart. Everyone was choosing to do what seemed right in their own eyes, and one wondered if they would eventually collapse into chaos. In her turmoil, Hannah entered the place of worship in Shiloh and quietly poured her heart out to God. Her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. She made a vow to God to be a Nazarite and asked him to give her a son so she could raise him as a Nazarite and she would give him back to God. Eli the priest was not paying attention to how his sons were treating the people, but he made the assumption that Hannah had been drinking at 9 a.m. and he publicly upbraided her. She defended herself and told him, "Not so." She asked that she not be associated with wicked women and that kind of behavior. She told him she was afflicted and was pouring out her soul to the Lord. He then blessed her to go in peace, asking God to grant her what she had asked of him. She then left, her face no longer downcast. Hannah believed and celebrated that God would answer her request, and she joined in eating with family and friends. The lectionary reading guides us to an incident between the boy born to Hannah, who she named Samuel, and the same Eli, the priest at Shiloh. Samuel lived in a time when the word of the Lord was rarely heard. The times were as dark as the night. Hannah chose to leave the child Samuel with Eli, who nurtured his faith as the boy was ministering before the Lord. One night, a theophany, that is, an appearance of God, happened. Samuel was just a teenager, and on hearing his name being called, he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am. You called me." Eli told him he did not call and that he was to go back and lie down. Samuel heard his name being called a second time and thought it was Eli calling him. Eli told him he had not called him. Then it happened a third time. Eli realized that Samuel had mistaken God's voice for his voice. So Eli instructed Samuel to know it was God calling him. And if it happened again, this would be the protocol for answering God's call. So when the fourth call came, Samuel replied, "Speak, for your servant is listening." The teenage boy was ready and willing to respond to God's call on his life. Hannah did not desire a boy child so she could compete with her husband's other wife. She wanted a son so that God could use him to change the hearts of the people. Hannah knew the story of the Egyptian midwives and Moses' mother, Jochebed, who was her mentor, who dared to admire her baby boy Moses for 3 months, and then she sent him floating down the Nile River, entrusting him to the care of Yahweh. The Israelites, under the leadership of Jacob, had entered Egypt many years earlier as shepherds, and they were now enslaved people and bricklayers. They cried for deliverance from the Egyptian and the opportunity to return to the homeland God had given to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jochebed believed that her son Moses would be the deliverer, and he was. Women may seem unlikely leaders in the Bible, but whenever God wants to change the course of humanity or do something new, he has always needed a woman, beginning with the woman Eve, to give birth to a son and to train the child to know the voice of Yahweh so that Yahweh may use the child. Hannah was preceded by a long line of women and was followed by a long line of women after her, including Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and Mary, the mother of Jesus.